Where are you, Jack? He's normally here. We have a very special episode here today. We have Dan Paterson from Questioning Christianity.
Yeah.
Welcome
Thanks,
to the
mate.
studio live. We don't get to do too many of these. Most of them are online, so I'm grateful that you're here.
Hey, the invitation to come up north is hard to put down.
Yeah. We said it was the Texas of Australia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Except we're on the north. But I guess most people think about this part of the world as being upside down anyway.
Yeah, somewhat. Somewhat. I guess we have Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy to thank. So he says, you guys should get in touch with one another. Hence,
it's weird that it took an American to connect two of us. We're in the same country,
I know.
operating in the same spaces, but someone from the outside had to come in to
for sure. So
bring us together.
Just to make sure that Michael's judgment was correct, a few questions, preliminary questions.
Great.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Favorite movie?
Well,
Or top three?
Look, top three is easily Robin Hood Men in Tights. It was a bit of like a childhood fan favorite for me. I actually really like the original Stargate SG-1. Again, a bit of a kind of thing that's in there. But favorite movie, if we get to include trilogies, would be the Lord of the Rings series.
Okay, yeah, that's it. I think we just became best mates.
Okay,
Remember that
great.
Part and Step Brothers?
Yeah. So something just stupidly slapstick comedy, something sci-fi, and then something big mystery, good versus evil.
Yeah, that works
Love
for
it.
me. Yeah, that's good. So questioning Christianity.
Yes.
I look at that page and you're really addressing some tough topics. Okay?
Yeah.
Tough topics.
Yeah.
Everything from the problem of evil, divine hiddenness. You're not shying away from any sort of creator and responding to them. Just briefly, what is questioning Christianity? What's
It's a weird name. I think people originally come over either our YouTube channel or our website and they're looking at it and thinking, finally another skeptic that we can get behind. And then they're like, wait a second, this guy sounds like a Christian. And that's certainly the case. I think we set out Questioning Christianity to be a space where people feel safe to ask hard questions of Christianity and to explore whether or not the Christian story has resources to be able to offer credible, helpful, life-giving answers. And so it's a place where I'm convinced that truth invites questioning and that the Christian story speaks to life's deepest questions, not just the apologetics objections, but just purpose, meaning, value, dignity, hope. Who should we become? How should we live? All of these kinds of ones. And so we created this kind of space, both online, but then in person, doing talks, training, and then digital content for people to wrestle with that. To say, can I believe in God? Can I trust the Bible? Can I follow Jesus in the modern world despite all of the challenges that involves?
Okay. Before I hit you with the real tough questions, problem of evil being one of them that I want to address, it seems to be a real sticking point for Christians to answer, which we will get to. Just why? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big part of my own story. So I grew up with Christian folks. Mum and dad took me to church. In fact, one of my earliest childhood memories in Melbourne, where I was born, was just going along to this little Baptist church hall and getting cookies after church. But I don't think much of Christianity sunk into me in my childhood years. You kind of hear stories in the Bible about Jesus and there's God, who you kind of assume is this guy up there in the sky that's watching out over you and he's got a lot of power and he can stop bad things from happening. And, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. But we had a huge car accident when I was 9 that left my mum with significant brain damage. We're actually on a family holiday. We lived in Brisbane, but traveled down to Melbourne over Christmas to visit rallies. And
How old were you?
9 years old. So it's like end of grade 4. And then on the drive home, we're going through the Blue Mountains in New South Wales and a truck pulled out in front of Dad on a very foggy day, single lane country road. And that was a wild experience that turned our family upside down. So you went from having a mum who looked after you to then having to care for your mum through my late childhood and then teenage years and just sort of flipped those scripts entirely. And I guess my childhood belief in God didn't survive those years. I didn't understand that if God could stop bad things from happening, why he would have let us go through that. And the challenges it brought for my dad in how to care for a family whilst at the same time looking after my mum, in a big way, the challenges it was for my sisters. Just looked at all of that and I just didn't make sense to me. And so I didn't have a ton to do with church during my teenage years. Dad didn't make me go a whole lot, didn't do much with the youth group, just sort of took a backseat to all that stuff.
What was your dad's face like in this time?
He's a weapon. Like my dad would be one of my heroes in life. And we're very different as people, but at the same time, I've never had modeled to me what it means to sacrificially love someone like my dad did. So when he made a covenant of marriage in better and worse, sickness and in health, till death do us part. He's just been a solid rock example of loving and caring for my mum. So I admire him tremendously. And he had a very practical, solid faith. My folks always were a great lived example of what Jesus taught, which is loving those who can't necessarily love you back, binding up the wounds of the broken, caring for those who are oppressed, trying to set at liberty those who are captive to various forms of addiction. So they ran youth drop-in shelters and worked with bikie gangs in Melbourne, and I had a foster sister for all my childhood. They just really lived that very practical, on-the-ground, dirty faith of caring and loving for people, and he's always been a magnet for hurting people. But we didn't really talk much about Christian faith. So it wasn't intellectual, there wasn't reasons for belief, it wasn't trying to make sense of all of these questions and controversies and doubts that are really common. So that was something that happened for me after I came back to faith in my late teenage years. And that happened through asking questions. Like I finished school, did relatively good. Anything I wanted to do, I probably could have. And I was trying to figure out, all right, what am I meant to do with my life? When I get to the end and look back, what do I want to have achieved? And it was in that, I guess, space of asking purpose, meaning, aims, goals, what does success really look like questions, as well as wrestling with suffering. And I knew how fragile life can be. A friend said, you know what, you should read the Bible and see whether or not, now that you're older, the Christian story has answers.
How old were you when
I would have been
said that?
17. So this was a mate that I was hanging out with. I worked at a local pool shop, installing filtration systems and testing pool water and handing out chemicals and that kind of stuff. And so he was an architecture student. We started hanging out a ton. He tried to teach me how to surf, and mostly I just drowned. But we were hanging out, going to see bands and stuff. And it was just in a lot of the friendship that grew up from that. He was a guy who went along to church. And he was just encouraging me to explore that again, now that I'm older, to see whether or not some of the questions I'm asking had better answers than what I'd encountered up until that point. And there was a whole bunch of messy reasons why I listened to him and started actually exploring whether or not the Bible makes sense. I'm just thankful, looking back, that God sometimes uses mixed motivations, because there was a girl involved as well whose dad was a pastor that kind of got me triggered on, well, I should maybe investigate to know what I think about this stuff, because he's probably going to ask me if we're going to date. So I had a whole lot of mixed reasons for picking up a Bible and starting again. But it was in reading with and then wrestling with the Bible that my skepticism ultimately melted away. And I know there are a ton of people that say, hey, if you want to become a Christian, read the Bible a little bit. If you want to become an atheist, read the Bible a lot, because the Bible opens you up to questions. But my experience was that when the character of Jesus is the one who melted my skepticism towards whether or not I can trust God. And in no way did I find either the church that I started attending or the Bible itself to shut down my, hey, but what about? And I do have questions, and I was trying to wrestle with, how do I put this all together? And there are parts of the Bible that I'm really uncomfortable with. But I was never told that, hey, you can't ask that. I was told that, no, truth invites questioning. And here's from my pastor when I was meeting up with him. He's like, here's a list of books. These are great questions that you're asking. How about you address these critical thinkers, see what they say, find out what you think, come back, let's keep chatting about it. And so I just had this awesome model from the very beginning of thinking, you know what, I'm interested in this, going back along to church, trying to wrestle with scripture, of just having it modeled to me. And so that's kind of been my pattern. I've been following Jesus now for 2 decades, but just as a pastor and doing degrees at seminary and wrestling with things, just always had that desire to, hey, you got questions? Great, let's chat about that.
So that's interesting, because you and I are pretty much the same age, and so we're thinking like late, early 2010s, 11s, 12s, 13s, okay, right? That period there, and that cultural, there was a bit of a cultural shift anyway in terms of away, I guess, from Christian ethics and principles. Yeah. So you would have, in terms of your faith story and faith journey, beginning this at a time where it was very countercultural. What was that like, say, with friends? Did you lose any friends in the process or anything like that? Not
really. So like my 3 closest mates, and actually I got back in touch with one just this week, but in school one was a Christian. His name was Tim, kind of a childhood friend that I grew up with. His parents had been missionaries in Israel for a while. Okay. Another one was a guy called Sarone, who's grown up in a devout Hindu family. His mum was very devout and sort of a centerpiece of their Sri Lankan temple. And then my other friend, Aus, who was a very devout Muslim as well. Sweetest guy you could possibly meet. He actually does a little bit of teaching within mosques now, but he's actually a very gifted dentist from what I understand. But it's interesting. Like, it was very mixed bag of mates at school. I went to a local government school. Majority of my friends, we had a friendship group, probably 20, 25 guys. Almost all of them would have just been not atheist in the aggressive against God stuff. They're just apathetic. And I think that's kind of the dominant religion in Australia is apatheism. I just don't really care about religion or the God stuff. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't appeal to me. It looks tough and confusing. Why should I care? That would have been where most of my friends were. So becoming a Christian, they'd ask questions. And I remember getting up at my 18th birthday at Lone Star Steakhouse, and I was terrified of public speaking at the time. And saying, guys, you mean a lot to me. Thanks for coming along. Just thought I'd let you know too, I've become a Christian recently, and so I follow Jesus now. And that was a big line in the sand moment for me. And anyone who's familiar with Aussie culture and guys knows you're pretty much inviting a bit of banter at that point.
100%.
And so Friday nights, we'd often do poker nights, do church youth ministry, and then I'd go and hang out with my schoolmates doing poker. It's kind of a cool difference of worlds. But they'd ask questions and they'd poke a bit of fun, but not really. It wasn't costly in that respect in terms of relationships.
That's pretty good. Pretty good. Did you play any sport when you were younger?
Yeah, being born in Melbourne, AFL's kind of in your blood. So I was born in the Women's Hospital down there in Carlton. So it's why I'm so good at speaking on theodicy and the problem of evil, right? I've been a Carlton supporter my whole life. But I played AFL growing up. Most of my schoolmates played soccer up here, and so I played soccer with them. I switched sort of mid-teens to do that. Loved cricket, played a lot of street cricket, as well as just watching the sports over the summer. Plenty of swimming. So
this whole journey that you're on, like, how did it go from coming to Christendom? When did you actually formally begin your studies? Because you've got not
long. So
CV here. I think we've got masters in theology. You've done something at Oxford. Can you just give us?
Look, it's a humble CV, but the study started quick. So I became a Christian at the end of 2004, right around my birthday in November, and then I was baptized February 2005. Actually, my dad baptized me at our church. It was a really sweet memory. And then I think the next year, 2006, is when I started at seminary. So it's a radical turnaround. It's like within 18 months, I've gone from not knowing what I'm doing with the future of my life to I'm now studying to prepare to be a pastor. And that wasn't my idea. So within that first year of following Jesus, I kind of dived in with both feet, and it really did have a big impact on me. And I'm wrestling and reading the Bible a ton and reading and trying to figure out answers to questions that were really just for my own sake, and then starting to talk about that with other people. And it was in this process of seeking God and learning how to pray and getting involved in just serving around our church. Just a bunch of different people, different context, older, wise, godly men and women sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, look, we think there may be a gifting here, that God's speaking to them and saying, we think there may be a calling towards gospel ministry. You should think about that. And it was in the process of weighing up their words and asking our senior pastor. I went to seminary at the time where they didn't accept people under 21, and I was 19 when I started, which meant I had to go through like this strict process of, hey, can you actually cut mustard here? Had to do an introductory essay, get special permission from my church to be able to make a case for starting early. And so it really was a kind of a lot of different lines of confirmation. This is what you're meant to do. So I did my undergrad degree in ministry, stuck around and did a 2-year degree in an MA degree in theology. Was academic tutor for a bit, but started as a pastor at a church up in Brisbane during that period as well. And then...
And what year was this?
2009.
Yeah, wow.
I remember it because the year that I met my wife, right? I moved to this new church to become the youth young adults pastor. And first night, she was one of the youth leaders there.
Really?
She came late to the youth leaders meeting, and so I had to sit in the only empty chair that was next to me, and I'm like, oh, hi. It's one of those cool meet cute moments.
Really?
Yeah.
What's the first thing you said to her?
Hey, you're late. Yeah. It wasn't smooth, let me say that. Not a smooth operator by any stretch. And so, anyway, I was youth young adults pastor there for a couple of years, and then had this awesome opportunity to go and spend a year studying in England with this program called the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. And that was just wild for me. I'd been doing ministry amongst our local school where there's just a lot of people, like 90% of our youth group didn't go to church. They were all just from the local high school, friends that had come along.
Yeah.
And so they've got no church background. They're just asking questions. But what about, and how do you make sense of this? And I've got these doubts. And so I'm constantly working in the space of what is the faith and why do we believe it? Theology and evangelism and then apologetics. And then that was happening with our young adult crew as well, a lot of uni students bringing friends. And so we're just wrestling with these big ideas always. And a friend said, man, you should check out this program. It would be perfect. And I loved it. It was like a year of learning from many of my heroes in the sort of Christian faith, people like John Lennox and Alistair McGrath and Amy O. Ewing. And
okay, wow.
Yeah, it's just a
John Lennox, what's he
cool
like?
crew. He's like the grandfatherly picture that you see on YouTube. That's him. As long as you don't get him when he's tired and grumpy. Like any person, he's human. And if you get him when he's been traveling and he's exhausted, and there's moments where you get grumpy old John, but for most of the point, you get this wonderful, godly, grandfatherly in the spiritual man that you would just hope you got to grow up around. He's sharp and incredibly kind of personable when he's on, but gets nervous around big groups of people.
For the audience that don't know John Lennox, he's an Oxford mathematician.
So he's Professor Emeritus of pure mathematics. So he literally wrote the textbook that if you're into pure maths, you're studying calculus and stuff, you'll be using his textbook. He wrote the book on maths, right? So he also though has 3 PhDs. So that's 1 in mathematics, but then 2 in the philosophy of science, basically. So he's big on interfacing. Hey, I'm a mathematician and I spent a lot of time around scientists in that faculty at Oxford University. He grew up at a time where they said, hey, you can't be a Christian and a scientist. You have to choose. And he's like, that's baloney. All of the first scientists were Christians. And so he's kind of pioneered this wonderful way of just saying, no, it's the Bible that gives me my mandate to study and understand God's world.
And there's something in that, isn't there? Because if we look at, I think Isaac Newton wrote a theology book at I'm not sure what age.
Pretty much all the scientists, when you go back to the 15, 16, 1700s, kind of like the scientific revolution, all of them were Christians, but also all of them had an inordinate interest in theology. So I think what you may be referring to is Isaac Newton in his Principia Mathematica, which is like the most revolutionary treatise, because it's where he introduces his Newtonian concept of physics, right? The laws that we understand the natural world through until quantum sort of threw that up a little bit. But in the preface to his original Principia Mathematica, he describes how he gives glory to God for the discoveries that he's made and hopes that these discoveries of the orderly operations of nature will convince his skeptical colleagues to believe in divine providence, that God is upholding, governing all of nature by the power of his word.
I remember Stephen Meyer. He's I think he's got a doctorate in the philosophy of science as well, and he wrote something and mentioned something quite interesting, that it was their faith or their Christian presuppositions that guided their scientific discoveries and approaches in terms of the intelligibility of the universe, and the predicated on the basis that the order and structure of the universe can be interpreted, was basically brought into existence by a divine mind. As image bearers of God, we have this ability to understand the universe and its order and decipher it. It would almost seem to be it's the lens that which they made their scientific discovery. So the idea of them being mutually exclusive in this society that John's probably done his studies in, or even what we've grown up in. It's completely
subverted now. So if you go to the scientific faculties at Oxford University, some of the greatest minds there are believers in God, believers in the Bible, believers in Jesus.
Yeah.
So I remember Morgan Freeman was interviewing, there's a physicist there who handles all of the doctoral students. So he's doing the PhD research work. His mind slipped out of my head for a second. But he was sort of asking him on the Story of God podcast. You can watch it on Netflix. And he says, so the more we discover about the universe, we kind of left the God stuff behind, right? And it's annoying me that I've forgotten his name because I had a lecture from him while we were there. But he says, no, the opposite is true. The more we understand the universe, the more it points towards God rather than away from him. And kind of what you're hinting at here is many of these scientists, when they read the book of Genesis, they said, this book gives us the base beliefs that we need to be able to make science work in the first place. In that, as you read Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created. What is behind the universe? Well, an eternal mind. And that this eternal mind has created an intelligible universe, meaning it's not chaotic and random and constantly in flux. No, it's a universe that follows orderly structure. And so you see in Genesis 1, God imposing order on the chaos waters in the unformed and formless, and darkness over the face of the deep, the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. And then the Word of God goes forward and begins to bring order, right? And so there's an orderliness to nature itself. And then God creates human beings, again, chapter 1, in his image. In other words, that human beings are created with the ability to do God-like stuff, meaning to have rational minds that are capable of unlocking the secrets that God has woven into the universe. And then not only do we have the capacity to do it because we have minds like God's mind, but we also have the command to do it. And the very first command of the Bible, they said, this is what made us do science. It's the engine that got it going. Be fruitful, multiply, subdue the earth, and rule over it. Fish of the sea, birds of the air, and in the old King James, the creeping things that creepeth all over the world.
Are you telling me climate change people should be Christians and gives them a reason to be Christian?
Well, from the very beginning, the first commandment to humanity was to steward God's creation in a way that frames beauty and cultivates the planet and that reflects the goodness of God to the rest of creation.
Can I just say there's some been interesting research, especially within the Pentecostal tradition, about eco-theology and all that stuff. And I'm not a huge climate change type person in that regard in terms of politically speaking, but it's interesting that the Christian worldview wholeheartedly gives you a reason to steward the earth in a way that would encourage people to recycle, to look after the earth, to steward the land.
Agree completely. There's an unfortunate Christian theology, like a view of eschatology, that because God's going to get rid of this world, it doesn't matter what we do. It's all going to get burned up anyway. That has been damaging to the view of the value of nature, I would say.
100%.
The right interpretation, the healthy interpretation of the Bible is that God is preparing us to be the eternal governors and gardeners of the new creation, that you're destined to rule with Jesus forever. So our job here is a proving ground. We are learning here how to prepare to be more faithful stewards of God's creation.
Amen.
And as it says of Jesus when he speaks about gifts entrusted to various stewards, of whom much is given, much will be expected. He's coming back and hopes to find us faithful. And so I think how we care for creation is a reflection of God's character.
It's actually, I was talking to you before when we had breakfast about one of the reasons I came into the faith was through eschatology and the study of eschatology. And I found that what was quite interesting in this dispensational premillennial view, rapture type theology, relatively new in the grand scheme of things in that it did provide a pessimistic view of the world. Like God's going to take care of it all. Who cares? What happens? We're going to get raptured out of here and all these things. And I found that this amill and post-mill perspective created this optimism and almost a sense of a different type of urgency that, with the glory of God at the forefront and the good news. And so I like this optimistic view that, God is going to win, he's going to conquer everything, and that there is a call to us to, spread this good news. But
I would say, even just to caveat that, even if you're a pre-mill, that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premise. Even if God is going to allow this world to fall into chaos and rebellion and then bring about tribulations and everything, and even if he does destroy the elements by fire, and gets rid of this creation and starts again, that doesn't mean that we as the ones who are here, that what's here now does not matter, and that we're not meant to be learning how to steward it well to the glory of God.
You don't want to be the guy that buried the coin. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or in our world, unearth the coin by destroying the whole earth.
Yes. We'll come back to eschatology because it's something I do want to discuss with you. But this whole thing about maths, it seems I do a few debates with atheists here and there. Bit of a fan of that, doing it with TikTok. Okay, you draw out a lot of interesting different minds. Sure. Some of them are really good and they love their philosophy. Seems to be maths though. Seems to be a little bit of a sticking point for them. Insofar, I ask this question: do mathematicians discover laws or do they create them? And they sit there and they don't want to say discover, but deep down they know they're discovering something. They're not inventing a law. And so there seems to be this metaphysical aspect of reality that maths brings to light, insofar that the law that I'm writing on the piece of paper is not really doing anything in reality. But there seems to be something indicative in reality that's governed by this principle of a law, that this is the way things is or the way things are. And so this idea is that they say two things. They say, okay, well, the things that we're witnessing in reality are descriptive, not prescriptive, okay? Seems to be a go-to point. But the question I ask is that it takes a mind to understand a law, the idea of a law. Does it take a mind to rationalize that? And they're like, yeah, sure. So does the actual law originate in your mind? Does that concept now, like, are we going to say that it's just the language of the mind that is, or is it actually occurring in reality? And when they get to the point where they realize that there is something occurring in reality independent of the mind, but it seems that you need a mind to ground the idea in.
Well, there's a whole lot of interesting things that you're kind of touching on here.
So this is this idea that a divine mind grounds the idea of laws in the universe that are out. We're clearly witnessing something.
I mean,
in the universe.
it's I mean, you've just opened up so many cans. I don't know which one we should dig into, but that there is an orderliness to nature is one of the things that makes science possible, right? If the ancient worldview were true, and there are in the universe a whole pantheon of Greek or Nordic gods or something like that, and each one of them controls different elements of the forces of nature, and the forces of nature therefore are changing every day on the basis of the whims of these gods. Have you pleased them or ticked them off? There's no way you can do science because there's no repeatability or predictability. It requires an orderly, law-like universe to be able to do things in the first place. So that's like an interesting observation, which the Christian story is at least corresponding with, right? There's a real match there. Then you've got this other feature of, well, not only are there natural laws, but when we're doing mathematics, mathematicians have for a long time been coming up with abstract equations that they're balancing out on their sheets. And then what they've often found is, hey, I've come up with an equation. But then we're discovering that this equation, which is an abstract thing that I've come up with from my own mind, actually has real-world application. And it's not simply that I'm trying to describe what's happening in nature and using a mathematical equation to do it. It's that we've come up with mathematical equations and then we've gone out and we've found real-world applications in there's features, natural laws, or ways in which shell formations happen that correspond perfectly to this abstract equation that we've developed for a completely separate reason. And they're saying, this is spooky. And this is the whole concept of the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, of our ability to use numbers and to be able to describe natural operations in a way that, why is these abstract imaginative capacities in the human mind able to map onto reality in such profound ways? And so it's just been this question mark that has been discussed as the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, one that certainly the God story would again explain. I mean, you've got the existence of abstract things like numbers and logical laws to begin with, which can be grounded
the laws
better.
Of logic. The laws of logic are purely metaphysical, right? And so that you need the laws of logic in order to, observe, measure, replicate, reach an objective consensus, formulate your argument. And it's funny when you do ask atheists this idea about, the laws of logic. It's a metaphysical principle that they rely upon in order to say metaphysical things don't exist.
I think there are answers to this that some of my secular friends would have. And they basically say, look, we just take these as givens. We have the natural world the way that it is. Now, how do we describe it with the mechanisms that we have? And they'll do their best to do it. I just find that I think deeply unsatisfying answer in that you're assuming the laws of logic in order to be able to reason at all.
Exactly. And I think that
assuming you also have the free will to be able to reason as well, rather than every one of your thoughts being the predetermined outcome of the evolutionary forces that made you and then the environmental factors that have been plugged in.
What's the counter to determinism and the idea that there is no free will? What's the Christian.
You mean for an atheist?
No, for a Christian. They get an atheist comes to them and says that you got no free will.
Yeah.
It's an argument from determinism. And what's the counter to that?
Well, there's a couple of ways you can go. I think one is you can try and provide a coherent explanation of how free will would be possible. And I think something like agent causation as a concept has been the most helpful to me in that there's not just physical causes, but there's agent causes as well, something that is a non-physical thing. And this would be the appeal to some kind of dualistic picture of the universe where we're not just physical beings, we're also some kind of spiritual or soulish creature. And there are a range of arguments for this picture of dualism that you could make. Everything from near-death experiences to spiritual encounters, right through to, again, our just simple ability to reason and to feel like what we're doing there is meaningful and that we're weighing evidence and following it to the best possible conclusion rather than just brainwashing one another with our particular processes, right? So I think there's those. I think the other one is just to say, hey, do you really live like that? So you're telling me that you don't believe in free will, but everything you do expresses the value of your decisions and you're holding people to account, morally speaking, judicially, for the things that they do.
Well, that's the thing. I think you can sort of philosophize yourself into a bit of a hole sometimes. There's got to be a practical application to it in terms of the things that we do believe.
Yeah.
And you'll find that we're never going to hold someone accountable for something that that their free will was disregarded. And I think that has to do with something in regards to even the idea of people that are insane. There's a degree there, the idea that just didn't understand what they were doing. They can't be held to accountable for something that they didn't know that they were doing. Same thing, we're not going to charge someone that did something against their will, right? But, if you do believe in determinism and something's stolen or someone hits you or something, you want them charged. You want them held accountable for their actions. So it's like, do you really believe it? Ultimately. And I think there was actually an interesting case in the States where someone tried to run a deterministic defense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Legally?
Yeah, legally. Yeah. And the judge threw it out. But yeah, that's...
Well, I think, if to put on my skeptic's hat for a second, I could still make an argument for the necessity of laws which hold people to account for their decisions, even if I don't think they could have done otherwise. Simply because either they are formed in such a way in which they're a harm to society, so we should incarcerate them, or because by holding them accountable, that either deterrent towards everyone else or the means of their rehabilitation in whatever corrective system that we have is the way in which we manipulate their behavior and thinking towards a more healthy pattern. But effectively, what we're doing to human beings then is we're programming them. And I think that's such a wild conclusion to arrive at. That's all every mode of education is. You're programming people to be able to think a certain way. It's not true because truth really has no ultimate... Like, how do you ground something as being true when everything is just a predetermined out?
Exactly. There is no right and wrong.
There
is no morality.
It just means you wouldn't know what's true.
Yeah.
You may believe something is true, but we have no means of stepping outside of our processes and systems to be able to test and say, does this really follow the evidence rightly? Because whatever conclusion I arrive at is
you can't ground morality or truth. There's no account for knowledge in that regard.
I do think you've got significant problems for grounding there. Like I'm not an expert philosopher when it comes to epistemology and particularly how free will would relate to forms of justification. But I do think to me, intuitionally, I'm like, it just feels like you're bumping into so many problems. And these are the kind of things that were brought up by C.S. Lewis with his intimations about, can you really trust the end result of blind evolutionary forces? And I say blind very intentionally there because there may be God-directed evolutionary forces, or kind of the evolutionary argument against naturalism that's raised as a defeater for naturalism by Alvin Plantinga. Okay. So he's like, look, if our beliefs are the end result of a blind evolutionary process that selects for survival rather than for truth, do we really have good reason to trust that the end result of those beliefs are true rather than just useful for survival?
They're interesting questions. You see, I think the idea of a naturalist worldview and the idea of the abstract, it seems that science is bringing certain things to light which call into question this idea of naturalism and that everything is governed by, I guess, what we can observe and measure. For instance, there was this great podcast that Sean McDowell did with this neurosurgeon. I'm not sure if you saw it.
No.
And he said that an average neurosurgeon and the lifespan, because they do these open these surgeries where they're awake, the patient, and they're testing and doing these stimulations in the brain.
So wild to me.
Yeah.
Could not do that.
In order to diagnose an issue or a problem, or
they need to be able to respond.
Awake. Yeah, they need to have respond. Either people have a stroke, some type of aneurysm, what have you. And so they do these tests and they do these stimulations in the brain. And in these stimulations in the brain, they've been able to research that they've done probably 2 million stimulations in the lifetime of a neurosurgeon. And there's this particular doctor, forget his name, I think he's a pediatric neurosurgeon. If you type in that and Dr. Sean McDowell, the interview will come up. And there was these other research and these case studies this doctor was bringing up where what they did is they were able to measure through stimulations a whole variety of things, being emotions, motor skills, they were able to, invoke emotions like fear and happiness and a whole variety of things in their body in terms of the biomechanical reactions between the brain and the body. Okay. The one thing they could not stimulate at all was mathematics. They could not stimulate history.
Well, thought. Yeah.
Well, this is the idea of the abstract. Yeah. So what they were proffering, this idea that these abstract aspects of whether it's philosophy, mathematics, history, what they're saying is that the brain is necessary in order to process abstract thought, but it's not where it originates. So this idea of the evidence of the spirit. That's the essential
dualistic argument, and that the scientific experiments like the Labrador experiments that led to the idea of, hey, well, there is no free will because we can see certain parts of the brain being stimulated by a question long before the person is consciously aware of what button they're going to press in terms of an answer.
Yeah.
So they're like, see, the brain is preceding their conscious awareness. Everything emerges in the brain. They're like, no, we've got serious reasons to doubt the end results of those experiments. They've largely been shown to be unreliable in the conclusions that are being drawn from it. And so I just do think there are good responses to those arguments, but our experience, our first person experience of consciousness and of rationality, I think don't fit the explanation of the naturalist story in a way that I find satisfactory. And again, I know there are philosophers who will have responses to that, but I find it interesting, like, as I talk with philosophers of mind who are active in this area, and people like Josh Rasmussen, who I've had on the channel before as a kind of Catholic philosopher, the shift in Philip Goff's belief recently, Ian McGilchrist, I've had Sharon Dirks on the channel, but just a fascinating group of people who are all in that space of neuroscience and philosophy of mind. And they're saying there's a massive shift away from mind emerging from matter first to being, no, we think mind is primary and matter comes in a secondary means, right? So the primary thing at the base of reality is consciousness. So even for secular philosophers who are shifting now to some panpsychism or sort of pantheism, a view where there is this consciousness to the universe that the brain allows us almost almost allows us to, like antenna in old TV systems. It's like we're tapping into consciousness. It's more like it's being mapped onto the brain as the structure that allows us to experience it, but it's not the origin of it. It's not the origin of that. It's super fascinating ideas. But I think, again, that shift because of the lack of explanatory power simply on naturalism is one of the reasons why I'm like, this is just a small pendulum move back towards the Christian explanation.
Yeah, see, I think Christianity provides an explanation and understanding of meaning, the human experience, question, like the meaning of life. And it seems today, especially in this post-COVID world, like there's a meaning crisis going on. It seems that, like, we know mental illness is an endemic, especially amongst the youth. There seems to be this, the byproduct of a naturalistic worldview is that you're just matter in motion ultimately, right? Just live to life's pleasures, but that doesn't feel like it's something that that resonates with people. And there's this disconnect between you're just a biomechanical machine as opposed to I feel like there's something more there. And I feel like I'm being lied to. I know my personal faith journey, the idea of I was agnostic, I was never really atheist, but the disconnect between this feeling of a spiritual side or a transcendental side to reality. You know, you look at this beauty, truth, goodness, you know, logic and reason. It's like there's a disconnect between head and heart, and it forces you to ask this question. I feel like now people, probably as a result of being quite unhappy, they're really asking questions. And I think Christian media and Christian music, there's a lot of things on the rise. Maybe
I think it's like just bubbling up. You know, like there's something more here. It probably depends on what generation you're a part of and what your life experiences has been. I still have a ton of friends who are very satisfied, sort of without thinking too deeply about the God stuff, and are still feeling like probably of a generation of hope that the future is going to be better for you than it was in the past. I think new emerging generations now are kind of thinking, you know, I'm not convinced that the future is going to be good for me. I mean, economically it's tough. I'm not sure my quality of life is going to be better than my parents' was. Those don't look like active promises that I can put my hope in. And they're more the ones who are leaning out right now and saying maybe there's something more.
You're telling me the great Dan Paterson, all right, pastor, philosopher, apologist, he's got friends that are secular?
Oh, I'm a failed evangelist. If
okay,
that's what you
all
want
right.
to put it.
No. Well, the question I have for you then, this is interesting, especially for people that
they'll
do
probably
have a
see
firm
this.
faith.
Hey, Gap crew. Yeah.
So the question I have for you is, like, do they ever ask any questions?
Oh,
knowing
totally.
You, like,
No. We talk about this all the
and
time. So, like, our local watering hole, there's a wine and beer bar down the road, like a few hundred meters from where I am. We hang out there pretty often, and it's often a topic of conversation. We'll talk about simulation theory. We'll talk about technological development. We'll talk about bigger questions around God and stuff like that. Some of them had a little bit of religious upbringing with maybe some Catholic past, but majority pretty irreligious. And they're very open to talk about it, but it's just not something that they're interested in.
You feel like any of them getting closer, like in particular?
I think what is useful, and this is the benefit of having rich conversations with friends, right?
Yeah.
They maybe had perceptions of what Christianity was that didn't match what's real. And so like you get to hang out with people long enough and have these conversations. They're like, I kind of assumed that it was empty and that you had to be a bit of an idiot, but I don't know what to make of you then, because obviously that doesn't exactly fit your personality or profile. And they I really respect you. So you just got an opportunity to say, well, maybe you've seen some caricatures or some bad experiences of Christianity, or you've had Christianity represented to you. I mean, a couple of them have literally said, but haven't you read The God Delusion by Richard? Like, how are you still a Christian after that? And when you say something like, if you talk to academic atheist philosophers like Michael Ruse and others, they're embarrassed by how bad the arguments are in The God Delusion. They're like, what? Look,
here's the thing.
It's just interesting that a lot of people have Christianity represented to them through the lens of a secular voice, and they buy that that's what it really is, and not knowing much about the history of Christian thought or the wealth of the evidences that are there.
Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy, he calls it Christian mythology, or no, atheistic mythology. He mentioned something that there's this belief and understanding that, these misconceptions.
Well, that was one of the reasons why. So Tim O'Neill, who's an Aussie guy, at least lives here, he started a website called History for Atheists, because he's an atheist. Okay. But he's like, man, I'm so tired of hearing all the dumb atheist takes on the history of our civilization. So the Dark Ages, he's like, there were no Dark Ages. It's the medieval period that gave us art and literature and music and everything that we now enjoy, that led to the Renaissance, which was Christian scholarship supporting all of these things. First universities were birthed. Like, you're looking at all this and he's like, it's not or he'll look at the
What's the name
church.
of that website?
It's called History for Atheists.
Interesting.
And so whenever Christmas is just pagan and Christians plastered over it with Jesus being born on Horus and Mithras and all of that.
That's going to be in the description
he'll
below.
Take that. But Tim O'Neill is an atheist, and he'll say, you just got, but at least be an informed atheist.
At least he's fair.
Don't misrepresent the other view and kind of reread all of history and the great minds of the past that were believers and assume that they're all just idiots. Like, give everyone their fair shake, get rid of your chronological snobbery, but then disagree with what's there. And I try as best as we can, try and steel man another perspective. And that's been the benefit of having rich, robust conversations with my friends. If we all love each other, but you're also able to point out differences and say, but you ever thought about this? But what about that implication? But do you still believe? What about this discovery? And I think
we must have some bold friends. I think it'd be very difficult to argue with you. I'm a
pushover.
This will be an interesting segue into something, because I have a friend, Lewis. Lewis watches the podcast. Great bloke. Okay, and here's something, because I know you've done a lot of work into divine hiddenness. Okay, Lewis, great guy. We started having conversations about maybe a year and a half ago, and he has continually asked a lot of insightful questions about the problem of evil, God, Jesus, how the Bible came together, all these different things. Sure. Really thought he's a local business owner. He's not a dummy.
Yeah,
and over time, he's become this idea that the Christian ethics and principles seem to benefit, society and human flourishing. And so he's from a logical standpoint, he's like, I'm willing to try this. And he's just had his boy, and he's about to have his second child. And he's like,
they can be transcendent experiences, or hellish ones too, when you're sleep deprived.
Sure, and he's not shy. He's had a lot. His wife has cystic fibrosis, and and so he knows about suffering too. And why would God allow suffering, allow these things to happen? Either way, he started to pursue, he's been coming to church. He actually goes to my mate's church here at Church of Antioch, Pastor Luke, shout out Pastor Luke. And he's pursuing, and he's really trying. And I'm grateful to have him as a friend to witness the experience. But he did say to me the other day, it's like, well, I'm reading up, doing some Bible reading. I'm coming to church. I'm pursuing what it is to be Christian, but I'm not feeling anything. And
at what point do I get this meet Jesus experience that everyone else talks about? Yeah,
exactly. So it's sort of like, I want this, what's this spiritual encounter that people are feeling and seeing, and I don't see it. And I want, why hasn't God shown that to me?
Yeah.
What do you say to Lewis?
Oh man, that's such a good question. And that's not a quick answer either.
No, I've got time.
One thing I found helped me is when I had these questions, call them doubts, call them objections to Christianity, criticisms, that you assume that you've happened upon that no one else has asked before in the past. And I find there's an undue confidence that can sometimes come with unbelief. as though, well, look at how intelligent I am to have arrived at these objections. Obviously, Christianity is untrue. And then you're like, but wait, some really, really clever and kind, compassionate people have believed this. Maybe there's more to the story than what I've heard at first. And when I started reading the Bible, that was exactly my experience, is the questions of suffering and of evil and questions of God's presence. Where are you, God? Divine hiddenness are written on nearly every page. They may as well, questions may be the ink upon which the Bible is written with, right? Because there are people that are meant to be the heroes of the story, or at least the spotlighted on at different points along the way, who are very fallible, broken, normal, everyday people like you and me, make good things and bad things, but who are crying out and saying, where are you, God? You know, that Jesus' cry of dereliction on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me, is penned by King David 1,000 years beforehand. Like, here's the guy anointed to be God's king, and he's crying out, I can't sense God. I don't feel him, right? Or Psalm 10:1, why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? And even Christians who say, you know, my life's falling apart. There's been an awful diagnosis. We're praying desperately that God would intervene and do something miraculous. And guess what? I've never felt more distant from God. And he's nowhere to be found. Like that, these concerns fill the pages of the Bible, at least gives me pause and think God's not sweeping it under a rug. And Christians aren't meant to pretend like this isn't a real experience. This is a real thing to be wrestled with. Divine hiddenness, according to the Christian story, should be expected, right?
The word, I guess God's not hiding away from the issue in the word.
Hilarious.
It's really, really good.
Yeah.
That's good.
So the two ways I think, there's actually like a proper atheist argument, or at least a skeptical argument that's developed from this experience of divine hiddenness. And it's got two key premises. One, if an all-loving and all-knowing God exists, he would ensure that there are no non-resistant non-believers. So he has the knowledge to know what would it take to convince me, and the power and apparently the loving nature to reveal himself to me in such a way, yet because I remain unconvinced. Premise 2, there are non-resistant non-believers, therefore an all-powerful, all-loving God does not exist. Now, I think what Christians could do in response to this and to Lewis is to question both premises. Typically, Christians question the second one. Is there such a thing as a non-resistant non-believer? And they'll say, hey, are you hiding from God? Because it was human beings in Genesis 3 that started hiding from God long before God ever was hidden from us. And they're the ones in sin and shame and misrepresenting who God is and being confused about his nature, hide from him behind fig leaves and fern bushes, right? And God, his first question, where are you? It's not them that were seeking God, it was God that was seeking them out. Where are you? And so there's this possibility that because of how sin has
just
distorted...
real quick, sorry to interrupt. We really need to stop, Christians and atheists alike, really need to stop looking at Genesis from a scientific lens. They really got to stop doing that, because what you just said there, the implications in terms of the meaning of life, like what is Genesis actually addressing there? Like God, I've never thought of it from that perspective. Where are you? That's exactly what it was.
The first thing God does not do is step in with a, what did you do? He steps in with the question, where are you? He's calling them out of darkness.
It's beautiful.
And I think that's really the biblical pattern there. But there's this then line that carries through all of Scripture, is one of the reasons why God's hidden to us is because we're hiding from God. And then in one way or another, whether it's because we don't want God to exist, because that would be a cramp upon our style, or some kind of moral straitjacket. We feel like God is bad news. We don't want him as part of our life. And there's plenty of high-profile intellectuals who have explicitly said the reason for my skepticism is I don't want God to be real. And then I look for justifying reasons to accept that conclusion. So your Aldous Huxleys and your Thomas Nagels, and we could go on and on. But I think to call into question people's intentions is not something I feel comfortable doing. Hey, the reason why you haven't experienced God is because you're not really seeking him. You may think you are, but really you're just a sinful creature who's hiding. I don't know. I think it's a jerk move, to be honest. I think what we could say is, hey, maybe there's some resistance in you that you're unaware of. Is that something worth exploring? Because like Proverbs 20 verse 5 says, the purposes of a man's heart.
Lewis is going to watch this because he's actually thinking that himself.
Which is great. I actually think if it's a possibility, what we should do is examine ourselves. And like Proverbs 20 verse 5 says, the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, and a man of understanding draws them out.
That's why I got such a heart for this dude, because what you just said there is actually he's feeling like, okay, what do I need to do to look internally here? Because I'm actually trying, And
I think that's a beautiful posture, and I would celebrate that. What I wouldn't do is, you'll never experience God because you're sinful and you don't want him to exist. Or to someone who says, I'm genuinely seeking, I'm like, no, you're not. I think that's just such a jerk move, genuinely. And we should never point our finger on someone else's intentions. Always let a person volunteer and explore for themselves.
So what would be
one of the chances is we're that way. I think the other one, though, and this is the one that the Bible definitely says, is God is hiding from us. The Bible is not ashamed to speak of God as the God who hides. In Isaiah chapter 45, verse 17, there Isaiah says, "Truly you are the God who hides himself, O God of Jacob."
Yeah, wow.
Like, that's a wild admission.
It is.
Or you've got these experiences of even Jesus crying out, this sense of divine distance, of feeling separated from his Father on the cross. And you've got all of God's people who, right throughout the Bible, are in God's purposes and yet feel a separation from God's presence. You're like, that's wild. God, for a whole range of reasons, is hiding from us. And so what I would actually do when it comes to the formal argument is I would actually question the truth of both premises. I think we can be hiding from God, and so that perhaps there's no such thing as a purely non-resistant non-believer. But I also think that God hides from us. And even if we were genuinely a non-resistant non-believer, and I think that category is entirely possible. I mean, it speaks in Acts 17 of God determining the times and borders of our inhabitation so that we may seek after God and stumble after him, though he's not very far from any one of us. You know, he wants us to be reaching out. But the reasons why God may remain hidden, I think, are really important to wrestle with. And I think there's a bunch of them, reasons why an all-loving, all-powerful God may allow non-resistant non-believers, at least for a time. I don't think anyone will be lost who would otherwise believe, because God didn't come and reveal himself in the end. But I do think God may allow people to be non-resistant non-believers for a period of time, and maybe even a long period of time as they're seeking.
Maybe that is, in some ways, maybe that is, you know, your wrestling match that Jacob sort of had insofar. You are wrestling with God in many, many ways.
100%.
In terms of, that's a part and parcel of the journey, you know.
I think there's there's three things. I'll quickly put them out, and then you can dig into any one of them that you want to. But there's three big reasons that at least make sense to me as to why God may remain hidden from us for a time. One is it helps us form the right kind of relationship with God. Another one is it helps us become the right kind of people to fulfill the purpose that God has for our lives. And the third is everything is so profoundly interconnected. So think butterfly effect or chaos theory. That if God reveals himself to Lewis right now, that may be what Lewis wants right now, but that could have adverse effects in the whole timeline that would spur off for others that is not God's ultimate end game. So think Doctor Strange, knowing when and how to reveal what to the Avengers. God is in a position to know how every point at which he reveals himself or hides himself, he's intentionally curating in order to bring about the right end game. And as long as no one is in the end lost who would otherwise believe, God, I don't think, is doing anyone wrong.
I like that because I guess in many ways, if I was to think about my own faith journey from, say, 2018 to 2021, 3 years of torture for me. Like, I did not sleep for 2 years of it.
Wow.
It was horrendous. And I would cry out to God. I really would. I had a fear of dying in my sleep. It's a whole anxiety thing. It got to the point where I was so worried about being separated from my family, who's going to look after him, all these things. And I didn't basically sleep for 2 years. Wow. And I would get on my knees in bed. Funny, I don't do that enough anymore. I do, you know, like, it's funny when you need God, you're really, really searching for him, right? Get on my knees in bed and I would pray, just let me get through the night, you know? And so for 3 years, I am struggling and I'm being torn apart. And I ended up, faith has been such a difficult word, and it's such a supernatural word to me, the idea that until in the Greek, the pistis, I realized also is like loyalty and trust. And trust felt like a very human word for me.
Yeah.
And so when
it's not belief in some abstract
it's
assent
like,
to a series of doctrines.
I don't understand what it is to have faith, but I'm going to trust in what everyone's telling me, what Bible's saying. I don't get it. This is going to be in my trust, I was being faithful. And so I decided to go, okay, for me, it's either death or God. Okay, I feel like dying. I don't want to die, but I'm just going to trust that whatever's going on here, that you're going to eventually show. And if I didn't go through those 3 years of pain, there's no way I'd be the person I am today.
Sure.
And in no way that I would be able to get through what I've got through and doing whatever God's called me to do, because it's not easy to walk a Christian path, by all means. It's much easier to retaliate to the people that insult me. Okay, it's much harder to hold back. Okay?
You get insulted doing stuff a lot. Online? Wow.
But it's this idea that what you're speaking into, that that there is a process and there's a trust, and
it's incredibly individual. Like I fully understand when someone like Lewis, or maybe a popular atheist representation of this would be a guy like Alex O'Connor, you know, where they express, why does God turn up to some people so easily? And they weren't really seeking. It's like God arrests them on their path of life and they have these profound spiritual experiences. But when I make such a big effort to seek after God, I feel nothing. Why is he easy to feel for some and not for others? There's no necessary correlation that these guys are more humble or that they're morally better, or there's no quality in them. It's just God knows things that we do not know about the complexity of our own individual needs, what needs to change in us in order to have the right kind of relationship in the future with God. And also God knows about all of the complex cause and effect web of creaturely decisions, and how what happens to me now will affect what happens to them. Like a classic example, why didn't God stop the apostle Paul from the huge persecutions that he unleashed on the Christian church for the first couple of years, right? Why allow Saul to oversee the stoning of Stephen? Why allow him to put Christians in Jerusalem in prison and to scatter the church? Why allow him to be traveling with letters from the Jewish high priest's family to Damascus to be able to there put Christians in prison to repeat the process? Why did God wait and allow so much hardship to come upon the church as a result of that? Why didn't he just convert Saul straight away?
Yeah.
And you're like, look, we don't have an answer to that, but there's a bunch of things that maybe it is. Maybe God allows him to operate in that way so that when he does come to faith, his having to wrestle with the case for what Christians were talking about, all of that is forming the necessary evidential foundation for a future faith.
Yeah.
Or what if God is preparing this testimony where you've got here a major opponent of the early Jesus movement who now becomes the greatest church planter the world has ever seen?
Amen.
And that kind of a story that then builds his platform of credibility from which to preach Jesus.
Quick tangent.
Yes.
Have you heard that Paul may have been a Sanhedrin?
Member?
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we just have no knowledge of that.
Just very quickly, the theory is that two things. Student Gamaliel, right? Obviously some type of prodigy to come from.
And we know that Gamaliel stood up in the court to make his protest.
And he was Sanhedrin. So the fact that he got letters from the high priest and the Sanhedrin himself, just a normal Pharisee, is a little bit weird, okay? Not too common for that to occur and to conduct persecution campaigns outside of Jerusalem.
Interesting circumstantial case.
He does say he cast his vote against believers, which is another interesting point. He was at the stoning of Stephen. So there's this idea, and mind you, this is purely circumstantial, just theory,
The challenge concrete. To that theory would be he speaks as one who never met Jesus personally. And that was the concern about the nature of Paul's apostolic ministry. In what way can he serve as an apostle if he wasn't from Jesus' ministry from the beginning, nor a physical eyewitness to the resurrection of Jesus? Yeah. And that was like the special calling on the Damascus road.
You didn't even let me get through the theory, eh? You just had to shut it right down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is
it's what we do. Here's my thing. Is the counter argument. I love so many fascinating features of what could be true.
Yeah.
But the Bible story itself is so full of those remarkable threads that God's woven in. We don't need to add made up ones to be able to make it.
True. I mean, I think is in terms of him saying
he cast his vote is very interesting. Yeah.
It is.
And he could have joined, to be fair, he could have joined the Sanhedrin in the aftermath of Jesus' execution.
Okay, let's get a little bit theological here. And Lewis, we're coming back to you, don't worry. This idea that he never met Jesus per se. So he does have an encounter with the Lord, though, that obviously other people can't see. So what did you...
the phenomenon of the Damascus Road is... it's visible and audible, but they don't hear the voice, is the explicit language that's spoken of those who were traveling with him on the road to Damascus. So they see a light and they hear a noise, but the voice is imperceptible for them.
Okay. And so there seems to be
According
this
to Paul's
gospel he did
testimony.
receive from Jesus, though, right? 'Cause
Correct.
He confirms it with the apostles.
Correct. And so he speaks about, I received this directly from the Lord,
Yes.
not from any man, but then I went and conferred with the apostles. He says this in a couple of different places to be able to make sure that he has their divine blessing. And obviously you get that in the book of Acts as well, that his message was confirmed by them and they support it, particularly with the Jerusalem Council.
And I love the fact that he practiced what he preaches as well, because he gets the gospel from an angel of light, right? So to speak. And it's obviously counter to what he knew to be true, right? So what does he go and do? You know, he goes out in the desert for years or whatever, you know. He goes out.
Yeah.
Now, what I think he's doing the first typology and Christology of, I think he's going back to the scriptures, just an idea. He's going back to the scriptures to go, how did I miss this? Where is he?
What's super interesting, like I have this pet theory, and it's not academically informed. It's purely from Luke 24, where Luke often talks about his sources as he's writing his gospel. And so the names that he mentions are a significant window into, I think, where his source material is coming from. So when he talks about the Emmaus Road experience, he talks about Cleopas and an unnamed disciple. So there's the two of them traveling on the Emmaus Road. They have the talk with Jesus. They get the Bible study through Moses and all the prophets. And I think like the book of Hebrews then, which is genuinely anonymous, not just internally or formally anonymous,
but Paul, though, doesn't it?
I'm not
like it's not his writing.
I'm not as convinced of that.
No, not a Pauline sermon recorded by Luke.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not Luke's Greek.
Okay.
But what is interesting is I've got a pet theory that that's Cleopas, because there you've got an explanation of Jesus showing how he is the fulfillment of every shadow in the Old Testament, about he is the true fulfillment of Israel's story, is the recapitulation of it all. So this idea that therefore the new covenant in Christ's blood had been explained very intently to Cleopas and this unnamed disciple, maybe that's the origins of the book of Hebrews. But also I think with the apostle Paul, he's got a gospel directly from Jesus that he needs to go and have confirmed with the apostles. And that's why the story of Cornelius and Simon in Acts 10 is so significant, that Peter is having to wrestle with his own internal favoritism of the Jewish nation. And what does it mean that I'm being sent out now to extend the gospel invitation? I mean, the scriptures always said Israel meant to be a light to the nations, and it's through you that every nation on earth will be blessed. But now we're actually having to go and bless the nations. And then Paul obviously having this remarkable role as a man between worlds. He'd grown up in Tarsus and he had merchant parents and obviously a man of means and knew Greek letters. And so his ability to be able to map across the Jewish and Gentile worlds, he becomes the perfect bridge that Jesus uses.
Another theory is that he was actually Mr. Paul.
Mr. Paul?
Yeah, Paul
what do you
was
mean by that?
Paulos was a very common Roman cognomen. It was his surname.
Sure.
So he might have been Mr. Paul.
Yes.
Gaius, was it Maximus Decimus Meridius, Gaius Julius Caesar? They all had three names. just an idea.
Yeah. Hey, best monologue in all of movie history. Maximus Decimus Meridius.
Yeah. So good. Hey, quick question then. When do you think Luke was written?
Yeah, look, I'm not an expert in the dating of the New Testament.
Okay.
I've always found persuasive the arguments for an earlier dating of the Synoptics. And I find the major reason for dating it later to be entirely unpersuasive, which is the concern that what the Synoptics represent is vaticinium ex eventu, or prophecy after the fact.
Yeah,
that because of Jesus making such specific predictions about the nature of Jerusalem's destruction and every stone of the temple being taken one from another and cast down. Those are far too bang on with the destruction of Jerusalem AD 70.
You can't ignore it.
That surely what Matthew, Mark, and Luke are doing is putting these prophetic words onto the lips of Jesus to try and justify his messianic credentials.
100%.
Right? So that's the major argument in favor of the later dating of the New Testament.
It is that prophecy seems to be a big issue for, I guess, critical scholarship and having to
correct.
Date it after
and
the fact.
For people who say, look, we want to maintain a degree of worldview, a lack of bias. So we can't adjudicate on metaphysical questions. That's not our historical.
Yeah.
But then you basically make a decision that prophecy is not a real thing. Therefore, Obviously, it's being written in aftermath. Because I think the historical arguments for an earlier dating of these things, and there's numerous ones that are given, but most of them are based around the nature of the storyline in the Book of Acts. That the Book of Acts is volume 2 from Luke's Gospel. Yes. Luke writes Luke's Gospel, and then volume 2, which is in my former book, O Theophilus, I began to unfold everything that Jesus began to do and to teach up until the point where he ascended into heaven. In this book now, he continues what Jesus began to do and teach through the ministry of his apostles in the church. And that cuts off with Paul under house arrest, roughly 62 AD, 60 to 62 AD in Rome, awaiting trial before Caesar. It is such an odd feature that if this genuinely were a chronicle of the early church that is written in the mid-80s, which is standard critical dating for Luke's gospel, that it wouldn't include some of the most...
Peter's and Paul's death.
And James as the leader of the church in Jerusalem.
100%.
All three of them in the middle of the 60s AD. I just find that entirely plausible. I mean, arguments from silence are tricky, but when you have such high expectation that it records the death of Stephen as the first Christian martyr, as one of the deacons, it records the death of James, the son of Zebedee, so John's brother, again, beheaded by King Herod, that it doesn't then record the death of, we'd have to call them the primates, right, in every way. Yeah. James, the leader of the church in Jerusalem, the Lord's brother, of Peter, the spokesperson of the apostles, and the lead apostle to the Gentiles, who was the church planner of the ancient world.
And half the book is following Paul anyway. So
correct. So it's just a very, very odd ending were it to be penned 2 decades after.
Well, here's the idea of argument from silence. Here's the thing. I agree with you, right? What is the I haven't heard many satisfactory answers as to why it can't be written before. Here's one of the things I ask. Knowing Luke's style, I'm here to write an orderly account, a meticulous account. I've interviewed these people. This is what's transpired. So
but claims are not evidence.
Yeah, sure. All right, let me continue. That's true. But I guess the idea that in terms of his presupposition for writing it, is that he writes it in such a way which is including medical terms from who's that Greek doctor? What's his name?
Hippocrates.
Yeah, Hippocrates. He's creating Greek medical terms. You can see that there's more of a historical account being written, especially when we've got other first century historical biographies and look in the ways that they're written in terms of Caesar and what have you. We can see that it seems to be an approach to give actually an orderly account. Now, knowing this...
And a ton of those details have been fact-checked and assumed to be mythical in their origins, that most of this detail is made up, but now has gone on to be externally verified to an extraordinary degree. You know, his knowledge of trade routes and of winds and of storm
He's obsessed with dates. He's obsessed with dates. In the time of this and this point, and I know the whole argument about Quirinius and all that stuff and when that happened. There's an interesting counter to that. With that said...
That argument's Caradius now.
With that said, he leaves out the 9/11 of the
the destruction of Jerusalem.
Like that does not make sense. You don't, because
when you're making the argument that, hey, Jesus is a prophet because he's predicting these things, you then attach the fulfillment to the prediction, because that's what they do in all the other gospel literature. If there has been a historical fulfillment, they draw the link. See, this thing is in fulfillment of what the prophets spoke about in advance.
Exactly. That sounds a little bit more like Book of Mormon.
At no point do the Gospels say Jesus said the Jerusalem would be destroyed, and look at how we got that right.
And
which would have been such an easy slam dunk if they made that
the fact that you leave it out makes no sense, as well as the deaths of the key pillars of the faith, so to speak. So with that said, I haven't heard a satisfactory explanation as to why that was omitted from his account. And
so there are a ton of critical scholars then that agree with this dating. Like, they're not Christian believing orthodox motivated reasoners, but they're like, you know what, actually these arguments are pretty supportive of earlier dating as well.
And I think I mentioned to you prior, I've nearly through Joel Marx's commentary on Mark.
Okay.
And I mentioned this thing that he dates it around, I think, 67, 68, 69. Okay. And the reason he dates it prior is, and being the critical scholar that he is, he's saying that anyone would have seen once the Roman-Jewish War began in 67 AD. That the
writings on the wall. You take on the war machine of Rome.
That's coming a little bit more towards the Christian worldview of prophetic fulfillment, but he's like, the writings on the wall. But one of the reasons he dates it prior to the fall of Jerusalem is the fact that he doesn't include, Mark doesn't include the fire that Josephus says that was burnt down. Now, fire being such a an apocalyptic fulfillment of destruction and
victory. Particularly divine judgment.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what he writes in there about divine judgment.
Because Jesus was saying that what's coming in AD 70 isn't just natural consequences. No, this is an end result of God's people rejecting the Messiah.
And so if they were going to burn it down, if they knew that it was going to be burnt down, you would include that in, and the fact that they left it out because it hadn't happened yet. And even the way Josephus records about how they convened a council, Titus, it's such a beautiful building. They were even going to possibly leave it there, but in the end they burned it down. And so it's very, very interesting.
My wife and I traveled to Masada, which is like that plateau city that had been built by Herod the Great. I mean, Herod the Great, for all of his moral evil, was a phenomenal bridge between the Greco-Roman world and Jewish culture, and he was a huge influence on developing architecture and the internal means of them producing in a big way. But he built this wonderful city on a plateau, Masada, which was like the last stand of the Zealots, right?
Yeah, wow.
And it's where they held out Roman forces for ages. And you can still see where they've built up the big causeway for them to be able to enter the city, because it's up on this big hill and they just keep you from being able to enter. But like in the Two Towers, where you've got the forces from Isengard slowly ascending up towards the towers for the Helm's Deep, it's kind of like that. They built this huge causeway to get their army up and eventually destroy the place. They actually suicided in there. They killed one another before the Romans got in. It's like a last act of defiance.
This is potentially a good segue into eschatology.
Okay.
Maybe one of the final topics of discussion here, or depending how we're going. How are we going for time? Oh, we're still going. Okay,
great.
All right. So I generally don't want to make it like, two Joe Rogan 2-3 hour type ones, but we'll see how we're going. You going all good? You're good?
Yeah,
you want to drink
great.
water?
Yeah.
Anything,
if it was
coffee?
Joe Rogan, I would have been offered mushrooms or a cigar by now. So I've got water. I'll make do.
So I believe Revelation was written before 70 AD.
Okay.
You're
wild.
I am. I believe it was written before 70
You're going
AD.
even against early church tradition.
Well, I don't know, because there was quite a few church fathers that saw, prophetic fulfillment in
absolutely, but in that sense, they see the visions more as explanatory of AD 70. So this is Vaticinium ex eventu, but in a divine revelation sense.
All right. So have a look at this. Irenaeus, one of the earliest sources, the predominant late date source. Okay, the phrase goes something like this: John, the one who had the apocalyptic vision, was seen in the reign of Domitian. Okay.
Correct.
So that's he had the vision in the reign of Domitian. Okay.
81 to 96 AD.
Yeah. But then if you look at this Greek word eroathe, the one was seen.
Yeah.
The question is it the apocalyptic vision? John, the one who had the vision, he was seen as opposed to the vision was seen. And it becomes a little bit interesting about how because just prior, 3 sentences prior in Irenaeus, he's using the verb in such a way that indicates that he's talking about John that was seen. So then you go to the next source, Clement of Alexandria, and he talks about a tyrant, right? The tyrant that sent John to the island of Patmos. Okay, which tyrant are you talking about? And then later in his writings, he says that the whole ministry, including all the scripture, because he was obviously combating this issue about scripture and what's apostolic. All the scripture,
is Clement of Alexandria.
Clement of Alexandria,
who's the end of 2nd century.
Next sort of closest source. He says, because he just refers to a tyrant. Tyrant could be, Domitian or Nero, right? And then he puts forward this idea that all the scripture in the New Testament was from the moment of Tiberius to Nero, including the ministry of Paul. So he ends everything, I guess, in terms of Nero, in terms of the ministries. So the idea that the argument for Clement being a late date source is very ambiguous at best, okay? And so you look at all this prophetic, like these things, there's this great, I think it's Milton Terry, this scholar, he writes that, like, if it's written afterwards, how do you explain all the actual allusions to Jerusalem being destroyed? And you've seen all the things about...
well, that's kind of the lead up of where premillennialism burst onto the scene with the reformation of the state of Israel, right? Because it was made popular with Darby's Bible. And then you've got this 1948, all of a sudden the state of Israel is a thing again. And people are like, see, this is coming alive. And that's where premillennialism and dispensational theology
how controversial do you want to make this podcast?
Well... I'm just these are historical features, and it doesn't say they're right or wrong. It's just saying obviously where you've got a reformed state of Israel and where you've got a commitment by many of the conservative Jewish community to want to rebuild the temple, which is going to require an act of war, to be able to. Well, technically, you could fit them side by side, but I don't think anyone's happy with that on the Temple Mount.
All right, let me just hit you straight with it: pre-mill, a-mill, post-mill, or pan-mill.
You know what?
Pan-mill means it all pans out.
So a lot of what I do in my ministry is I talk about how Christians have options.
Yeah.
In that I don't think the Bible is prescriptive in a lot of the things that we may want to have answers to. I think it gives us resources that are not so determinative that you're an idiot if you arrive at a different position. And a lot of people will say, well, God's a failed communicator then. Why are some Christians pre-mill, some post-mill, some a-mill, and why do some not care, right? And I don't agree with that assessment. I think that God has very good reasons for giving us the story of Scripture as a spiritual curriculum that is designed to help us become wise unto salvation and to teach, correct, rebuke, and train in righteousness for the things that actually help us become Christ-like. And that by allowing disagreement and differences amongst Christians doctrinally, as long as we're tempered by the Spirit of Christ, having the mind of Christ, that actually allows us to better engage in study and debate. That forges moral, intellectual, and spiritual virtues in us that wouldn't otherwise be forged. In other words, if the Bible operated the same way that catechisms do, where it asks a question, then it spoon feeds you an answer that you have to memorize, and everyone's exactly the same, we would not develop the mind and heart and spiritual searching and the wrestling with God in uncertainty and doubt and difference that it takes to be able to become the kind of wise creatures that will rule and reign the new creation with Jesus. And so God's end game of who does he want us to become dictates the kind of revelation that he gives to us. So when it comes to things like this, I don't think it's helpful for me to go around and say, here's my view. Now, I've got all of the Counterpoint series at home, 4 views on this, 3 views on that from Zondervan, 38 volumes and counting. There's new ones to come. And I read these books of this scholar argues his view, and then the others critique it, and then he responds to their critiques, and then the next person lays out their positive view. I've read the arguments. I've got convictions. But I don't think it's necessarily helpful for me to go around the world and saying, here's what Dan Paterson thinks. Unless I have the time to lay out the arguments why. Because usually when people ask you, they're asking for one or two reasons, and I'm not saying this is true of you. Often people ask me, what's your view, because they want to put me in a box. Will I take you doctrinally serious because you agree with where I've arrived? And if 100%. You're of my tribe, then I'm going to subscribe to you and recommend you. Or they're asking you to do their thinking for them. Can you just tell me what I'm meant to believe? And at least then, if you're someone that I admire, that's what you believe, fine, that's what I'll believe.
On that note, inspiring philosophy, what denomination do you belong to? Tell us, tell the world.
I'm gonna let this slip here publicly. So the first time I met Mike Jones, we were walking the streets of San Antonio together in Texas, right? Yeah. And I didn't know him well at all, and I hadn't seen much of his stuff online, and that's my bad. He's been an enormous gift to the world of kind of Christian apologetics. But I'm just chatting with him as you would any other dude, and asking questions in the get to know you phase as you do with any other dude. And I've asked him, where do you live? I don't know, what's your family like? And I asked him, what church do you go to? And I did not realize about how he's so actively quiet about this because he doesn't want to foster partisan arguments within Christianity, but just wants to foster a mere Christianity. And so I stepped on this cultural landmine for him, and he's looked at me as though I've just slapped him across the face and committed some huge social faux pas. And I'm thinking, oh boy, what did I just do? And anyway, I actually admire him for keeping that somewhat hidden. Although if Wes Huff comes to Australia, if he fulfills his promise, that is a secret that will be revealed to Wes if he signs his name on the tree outside of my house. I don't know if you saw that video.
I did see
Michael
that.
Jones
I did see that.
Carved his name into a tree at my house and said, if the other half of the Michael Jones and space forever, if Wes Huff fills in that space, he's allowed to find out.
Well, you know what? That's going to be the trailer.
So I hold the secret in my brain that I could. I won't.
This is the trailer for the podcast now. Right. You know what? I really like your answer about what you said about the eschatological viewpoints, and I'll tell you why. Because people, especially with eschatology, and even just in doctrines in general, whether it's predestination, Arminianism versus Calvinism, and all these things, we can get so attached to the doctrine as opposed to Christ.
I love that reflection. Yeah,
it's so amazing.
He would be my big concern for people is that whatever view of eschatology, which is the study of the last things that they come to adopt, that undermines their commitment to doing the things that Jesus told them to do.
Do you know what I mean?
And if Jesus has given you explicit commands about how to steward the planet and to love your neighbor and to give yourself in devotion as a living sacrifice towards God, but yet your view of end times has you spending all of your time working out charts and pictures, and just do the things that Jesus told you to do. And this is not just an argument for it doesn't matter. It does have some doctrinal implications that are worth exploring. Mm-hmm. But please, wherever you land, hold your view in a way where you're faithful to the commands of Jesus and where you're faithful to building up the church, even where there's differences. So 100%. Don't use it as a cudgel to beat down other Christians.
100%. I try and look at the body of Christ in such a way. When I look at Catholics, I think there's a beautiful reminder about hierarchy and structure and having, a great ecclesiological impact on how we're supposed to govern. More authority for the church insofar that even just in, the Pentecostal charismatic traditions within Australia, sometimes it would be nice for the churches to act with a little bit more authority, okay?
Or at least some spiritual mothers and fathers to get to the eccentric corners and say, oh, can you just do the Priscilla and Aquila thing to the passionate Apollos? Hey, love what you're saying, but can we just come in and just teach you the way of Christ a little bit more effectively?
By all means. And then I look at the Orthodox and I'm starting, look, to be honest with you, I'm starting to identify more and more with Orthodox
going back to your Greek roots.
Yeah, mate. I know. More and more with theology, even the idea of monarchical Trinitarianism is just blowing me away. But they give us a beautiful understanding of tradition. And I in many ways, they have not changed. Even some popes have quoted about how they're just too strict and too rigid. But then I look at, the Protestant and about, the emphasis on God's word. You know what I mean? And then the Pentecostals, and the charismatics.
And on making it accessible or understandable. I think that's probably been the biggest Protestant influence.
100%. Yeah. And then the emphasis, and you see all the growth in the church at the moment, is within that, Pentecostal, charismatic tradition, evangelical tradition, and the emphasis on relationship with the Holy Spirit.
It's almost like people want to experience God.
Exactly. So when you put them all together, though, it's like, oh, wow, God is doing something. I went to Brazil and went to a Catholic church, beautiful Catholic church, and they're doing Hillsong worship. Yeah. And the pastor's in there, he's leading it, he's singing. And I'm like, God, what are you doing?
Yeah. Hey, Australia has left its mark on global Christianity, for good or for ill.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. There's a wonderful
God's
vision.
doing something, and even the largest movement in the world in terms of gifts of the Spirit, the charismatic Catholics.
That's wild.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So my point is this, and even now, in many ways, all the growth coming to the Orthodox Church is from ex-Protestants. You know what I mean? So hang on a tick here, right? God is doing something where we need to get less critical of the denominations and come a little bit in terms of our unity. And that's why I really respect what you're doing.
It's a moment of opportunity to say, hey, it's great. Where can we learn from each other?
Yeah.
And whilst I don't want to downplay the doctrinal differences, I think there are some serious ones amongst Orthodox and Catholics and Protestants. The value is, how do we have this conversation as the three great branches of the Christian faith? And I know there's others in the Eastern and then the Ethiopian church. I don't want to downplay that either, but I'm saying it's a moment of, rather than internal war, as people are turning back to Christianity, what they should be seeing is a Christian broad family. Yeah. We're all nourished by the same roots, Christ and the apostles. And we're all seeking to be faithful to being the church that Jesus prayed would be one. And we may have serious disagreements about how we parse out then our beliefs. But I pray that we're Christ-like to one another. And I pray that the thing that shapes us most is the love of God. And I hope that actually much of our misunderstanding of each other's traditions can be ultimately eroded by better, godly teachers in all traditions to be able to help others understand. It clarifies what the differences really are. It just allows us to realize all the silly stereotypes and caricatures we have of the differences. But then to be able to feast from the riches of each other's traditions are going to be a real gift. So and I do wonder if part of God's reasoning for allowing denominations is not that, well, they tend to reach different kinds of personalities as well.
Yeah.
You think, all right, a whole field full of one flower is cool. It's beautiful. Yeah. But how cool will you go into a garden that's been cultivated to have a bunch of different colored flowers? It's a different picture of beauty. And maybe that unity amongst diversity is one of the means that God's going to use to reach a very diverse world.
Yeah. My reformed bros, my, cessationist guys on Instagram, go with Jordan, shout out to you. you look at it, I don't agree with a lot of the doctrines, but mind you, I can see that it can serve a certain purpose.
Yeah.
Even, our pastor at our church, Nathan, we just recently spoke about the idea that there's some people in our congregation that he thought that was better suited towards a reformed approach on theology, and we've got reformed churches that we're friends with and friendly with, and that
basically if you're an engineer, you're going to end up a Calvinist. It's a particular pattern seeking that you're after.
Yeah, I know. And look, the thing is exactly what you said there. God's opened up many avenues for the gospel to be, coming to the truth of who Jesus is. I feel like as long as we've got an understanding and agreement of who Christ is, that's very, very central. And there's people outside the scope of that what I wouldn't consider the body of Christ, but pursuing him is definitely going to, I believe, will lead you to the truth ultimately.
Yeah.
So I love what you said there. Look, I think this might be a good opportunity to tie this up because I think it's a good message, and I like finishing podcasts on a good message like this. I really do. Not to be like, should we finish it? And then like the opportunity to do a little bit more in the future, which I'd love to have you back. There's something else. I said I would circle back to Lewis. All right. And one of the reasons I want to do that because you reminded me with that whole comment on and commentary on divine hiddenness and how God is shaping you and doing something that not necessarily you can see.
Yeah.
That is exactly what happened to me. And I think about Lewis just quickly, it's only been 18 months. Do you know what I mean? And I think maybe that time to keep walking the path in order to say that, yes, God has not revealed spiritually to you just yet. Not to say that it's not going to happen.
Totally.
And if it's going to take, a month, a year, 10 years, like how long would you be willing to pursue it? There must be a great story being written for him. And I think he's going to be a powerful person in the kingdom. I really do believe that for him. So I just thought
there's some beautiful elements about divine hiddenness that we didn't get to. And this is, I've got long videos on our channel where I've wrestled this through and dug down. There's so many layers to peel back, but one of the most beautiful is that in some ways, yes, we experience God as hidden, but in other ways, God has made himself profoundly known. Amen. And I don't think it's just the 24 or so arguments for the existence of God and the truth of the Christian story that philosophers marshal in the case for Christianity. I think it's the person of Christ himself. And you think, all right, if God does want a deeper, meaningful relationship, if he wants us to love him, how's he going to choose to make himself known? And God could tear open the sky or this studio and with a booming voice at the transfiguration of Jesus, this is my beloved son, Lewis, believe in him. And he could force every knee to bow and every tongue to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. But I don't think God wants us to fall before him under the weight of his enormity. I think he wants us to love him for who he is. God could scare every one of us into belief, but that's not the kind of relationship he's after. And there was this wonderful story that's told by a Danish philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, and he wrote this parable called The King and the Maiden. And he said there's this king who falls in love with this humble peasant young woman. And he's wondering, man, how do I marry this girl? I want to marry this girl. Marry her anyway? Well, that was one of his counselors. He's like, well, you're the king. Just command her to be your wife. And he thinks, I could do that. That's within my power to force her to love me. But that's not a deep and meaningful relationship that is built upon compulsion. I don't want that. So he can't use his power. So another one of his counselors says, well, why don't you just show her all the benefits of becoming your wife? Show her all the trappings and the house and the wealth and the servants that she'll gain if she becomes your queen. And he thinks, but then she'll just choose me, the same reason that gold diggers choose wealthy old dudes now. She'll choose me just for the stuff, not because she loves me. And so he comes to the realization against all the counsel of his wisest sages that actually the only way that I can do this is by hiding what I am to win her over with who I am. And so he veils the glory of being king and he takes on the humble posture of a servant and able to draw near to her and to woo her over of how much he loves her and her to see who he is. That she would see the beauty of his character as the thing that draws her to him. And only at the end is there the great reveal of also what does she gain by that. And I think if God was going to make himself known for a deep and meaningful relationship with us, that's how he comes. not with pomp and with power, but humbly in the person of Jesus. And I love that when I was reading the Gospels. That's where I came to faith. Go to the end of John's Gospel, and Jesus had said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and the Father are one. And I'd been so drawn to the character of Jesus of Nazareth and so overwhelmed by just these redemptive encounters and the sublime moral teaching that he sets out, and said, if that's who God is, I may still have questions, but I know that I can trust him.
Amen.
And I think that's the invitation of someone like that I would give to Lewis. Keep exploring Jesus. Keep looking into the life of Jesus, because he is the invisible God made visible. Colossians 1:15 says, the image of the invisible God. Or in Hebrews chapter 1, it opens with, and God in former times whispered through the prophets, but now he's made himself more fully known in his Son, who is the exact representation of his nature. And I just think that's the gift. If you want to know who God is, if you want to see God made human, look at Jesus. And that's the one who's inviting you to believe in and love him.
So good, man. We have to finish it right there. That is so good. I love it. And I know I've got so many more questions for you, and I really feel like we're going to do a few more of these in the future.
Cool.
There is a couple things. First and foremost, thank you so much for coming on.
Honor,
really
dude.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me up here.
It was so good.
I haven't even been eaten by a crocodile yet this far north, so
we've still got another 24 hours.
Okay, see how we go.
Guys, I'm going to leave all Dan's socials and the link to in the description below. There's also a great resource in terms of the website, and also there's a book that you've written as well, which I'm going to leave a link to.
Yeah, it's all questioning Christianity. Is there more to the story? And it really helps people explore what Christianity is, genuinely the whole thing, and then also deals with lots of people's objections and questions.
So good. And we're also, there's a big event that Dan's putting on with Wes Huff, the big Wes Huff. We'll leave a link to where you can get some tickets to that. There's still tickets available for
that? Yeah. So we've got 2 nights, one on the sunny coast on September 17, a Wednesday night, and then one in Brisbane on September 18th, a Thursday night. So
So that's going to be really good. So if you do want to get on that, tickets are selling fast. So there's not many left, but we'll leave a link down below. Hopefully you can get yourself one. I'll be going. It's going to be awesome.
I get to introduce you. Everyone calls Big Wes Huff. It's only because they put the cameras facing up. It's an old Hollywood trick. The guy's short. Like, look at the photos of the two of us together, and I'm average at best, and he's shorter than me.
You know what I love? I love when he did his samurai video in his tight shirt, there was like, where's Buff? You know? He's a bit
the Buff apologist.
The Buff apologist. But anyway, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
I'd love to have you back and do this more. But what you just said there at the end of this podcast, that was, it was really beautiful. You can see how the Holy Spirit touches you and everyone around you and what you're doing in your work. And I just hope that the Lord just blesses you with everything that you need to keep doing more and more and more. I think you're a blessing. We're grateful that Australia has you as doing the work that you're doing. Okay? God bless.
Privilege. Thanks, brother.
Thanks, man.
Catch up.
That was good, man.